Serving bias, you want to get out of yourself. Thinking that what's good for you is good for the wider civilization and rationalizing all these ridiculous conclusions based on this subconscious tendency to serve oneself it's a terribly inaccurate way to think. And of course you want to drive that out of yourself because you want to be wise, not foolish. You also have to allow for the self-serving bias of everybody else, because most people are not going to remove it all that successfully, the human condition being what it is. And if you don't allow for self-serving bias in your conduct, again, you're a fool. You just aren't competent. I watched the brilliant Harvard Law Review trained general counsel of Solomon lose his career. And what he did was, when the CEO was aware that some underling had done something wrong, the general counsel said, gee, we don't have any legal duty to report this, but I think it's what we should do. It's our moral duty. And the general counsel was totally correct. But of course it didn't work. It was a very unpleasant thing for the CEO to do, and he put it off and put it off and put it off. And in due course, why the thing eroded into a major scandal, and down went the CEO and the general counsel with him. The correct answer in situations like that was given by Ben Franklin. He says, if you would persuade, appeal to interest, not to reason. The self-serving bias is so extreme. If the general counsel said, look, this can erupt in something that will destroy you, take away your money, take away your status, it's a perfect disaster, it would have worked. You want to appeal to interest. You want to do it with lofty motives, but you should not avoid appealing to interest. Another thing, perverse incentives. You don't want to be in a perverse incentive system that's causing you to behave more and more foolishly or worse and worse. Incentives are too powerful a controller of human cognition and human behavior. And one of the things you're going to find in some modern law firms is billable hour quotas. And I could not have lived under a billable hour quota of 2,400 hours a year. That would have caused huge problems for me. I wouldn't have done it. And I don't have a solution for that for you. You'll have to figure it out for yourself. But it's a significant problem. Perverse associations, also to be avoided. And you particularly want to avoid working directly under somebody you really don't admire and don't want to be like. It's very dangerous. We're all subject to control to some extent by authority figures, particularly authority figures that are rewarding us. And that requires some talent. The way I solved that is I figured out the people I did admire, and I maneuvered cleverly without criticizing anybody. So I was working entirely under people I admired. And a lot of law firms will permit that if you're shrewd enough to work it out. And your outcome in life will be way more satisfactory and way better if you work under people you really admire. The alternative is not a good idea. Objectivity maintenance. Well, we all remember that Darwin paid special attention to disconfirming evidence, particularly when it disconfirmed something he believed and loved. Well, objectivity maintenance routines are totally required in life if you're going to be a correct thinker. And there we're talking about Darwin's attitude, special attention to the disconfirming evidence, and also to checklist routines. Checklist routines avoid a lot of errors. You should have all this elementary wisdom, and then you should go through a mental checklist in order to use it. There is no other procedure that will work as well. A last idea that I found very important is I realized very early that non-egality would work better in the parts of the world I wanted to inhabit. What do I mean by non-egality? I mean John Wooden, when he was the #1 basketball coach in the world, he just said to the bottom 5 players, you don't get to play, you're smart. your sparring partners. The top 7 did all the playing. Well, the top 7 learned more, remember the learning machine, because they were doing all the playing. And when he got to that system, why, Wooden won more than he'd ever won before. I think the game of life, in many respects, is getting a lot of practice into the hands of the people that have the most aptitude to learn and the most tendency to be learning machines. And if you want the very highest reaches of human civilization, that's where you have to go. You do not want to choose a brain surgeon from your child among 50 applicants, all of whom just take turns doing the procedure. You know, that's not the way to get the really important. You know, your airplane's designed that way. You don't want your Berkshire Hathaways run that way. You want to get the power into the right people. I frequently tell the story of Max Planck when he won the Nobel Prize and went around Germany giving lectures on quantum mechanics. And the chauffeur gradually memorized the lecture, and he said, "Would you mind, Professor Planck, just because it's so boring to stay in our routines, would you mind if I gave the lecture this time and you just sat in front of my chauffeur's hat?" And Planck said, "Sure," and the chauffeur got up and he gave this long lecture on quantum mechanics, and after which a physics professor stood up in the rear and asked a perfectly ghastly question. And the chauffeur said, "Well," he says, "I'm surprised that in an advanced city like Munich I get such an elementary question. I'm going to ask my chauffeur to reply." Well, the reason I tell that story is not entirely to celebrate the quick-wittedness of the protagonist. In this world, we have 2 kinds of knowledge. One is Planck knowledge, the people who really know. They've paid the dues, they have the aptitude. And then we got chauffeur knowledge. They have learned to prattle the talk. And they have a big head of hair, they may have fine timbre in the voice, they really make a hell of an impression. But in the end, they've got chauffeur knowledge. I think I've just described practically every politician in the United States. And you're going to have the problem in your life of getting the responsibility into the people with the Planck knowledge and away from the people who have the chauffeur knowledge. And there are huge forces working against you. My generation has failed you to some extent. We are delivering to you in California a legislature where only the certified nuts from the left and the certified nuts from the right are allowed to serve, and none of them are removable. That's what my generation has done for you. But you wouldn't like it to be too easy, would you? Another thing that I found is that an intense interest in a subject is indispensable if you're really going to excel in it. I could force myself to be fairly good in a lot of things, but I couldn't be really good in anything where I didn't have an intense interest. So to some extent, you're going to have to follow me in, if at all feasible, you want to drift into doing something in which you have a natural interest. Another thing you have to do, of course, is